Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, I'm so excited. I am joined by Janet and Geoff Benge. I'm very excited. I don't know if you know this, but they are the authors of all of our missionary biographies we carry. So I went back to the warehouse and pulled these out, and these are just a select portion. They have a ton of these missionary biographies, and I am so excited to be talking with them today. I am talking to them today because we are in the midst of our Sonlight readathon. If you don't know anything about our readathon, basically you get to pick the missionary agency you want to work with or raise money for, and then you would read missionary stories or learn about Christian growth in some way, share it with your family and friends, and raise money. These Janet and Geoff here with me have been a tried and true author we've carried at Sonlight for quite some time, and I'm so excited to have you guys here. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's great to be here.
I want you to tell us a little bit about how you became missionary writers, how you started.
Okay, well, you start things, you don't really know where the start is sometimes. Like I could go back to when we were young children, and Geoff could go back to when his dad read missionary stories to him. And, there's a whole bunch of things that are always happening that are moving you along towards something that God wants you to do. And it's hard to say, oh, that's the moment it started. But I think the moment that we started realizing that we could write for other people and have impact was when we were missionaries with Youth with Mission in the Philippines. And Geoff and I are both from New Zealand, which is a very, what would we say? It's a very moderate country. It doesn't, when we grew up, it didn't have very poor people or very rich people particularly. Everybody had what they needed. We had never seen a person begging. There were no people with no homes. And so to go to the Philippines in our early 20s was shocking, because there was, people literally starving to death around you. There was people, with guns at the supermarket. It was just like, whoa, this was a whole new world. And we lived up in an abandoned hotel. And the first week that we moved in there, I looked out the window early one morning, and there was a snake of people all down the hill. And I thought, gosh, I wonder what we're doing here. So I went and asked the director, what's happening today? Must be something big. And he goes, well, it's our weekly distribution of used clothing. Anyone who comes can have 2 pieces of used clothing. So say a pair of used flip-flops and a t-shirt. And from my very middle-class background, I was shocked. I was like, these people are going to line up for 3 or 4 hours for a t-shirt that somebody, didn't want. Maybe it's got holes in it. Maybe you can't read the writing anymore. And so I just was like, whoa. So I wrote a newsletter home to our supporters, and I kind of talked about the poverty. And some other missionaries who lived with us asked if they could use some of the things that I'd written, and I said sure. So that's how we started. We just started sharing what we saw and the need that we saw, and the hope, well, really the belief that if we could write it accurately enough and grab people's attention, that we could make a connection between these people who desperately needed help and people who were able to offer the help. So that's how we started in our writing career.
Yeah. Well, and then we moved over because we did such a good job writing our own newsletter. We ended up writing a national newsletter for Youth with a Mission in the Philippines. And that was very popular, and we really tried to take people inside, what it was like, what the work that we were doing. And that in turn led to getting a phone call one day asking, would you like to come to the United States and learn how to write books with John and Elizabeth Sherrill, who had written Hiding Place and what's Day Focus?
The Crossing
Switchblade and some of those,
old classics.
And actually said no. Like, I'm writing this newsletter and it's like 8 pages and it takes a lot of time and effort. And like, now you want me to come and write a book? I can't imagine that. Well, this particular person, I think, called 4 times. On the 4th time, I said, oh, okay, yes. And so we came to the US 1986 and learned how to write the kind of style of books that we write from John and Elizabeth Sherrill. And sort of, they taught us pretty much everything we know. And then over the 34 years or 35 years since we've been writing, you know, we put our own stamp on the approach that we take. But yeah, so that's how we kind of got to where lots of people, you know, writers write and they're struggling to find publishers and to break into this thing. I like to tell people, writing literally found us. We did not set out to be the writers that we are today.
Boy, God works in mysterious ways, doesn't he?
Yes,
oh, yes.
Well, mysterious, yes, because I am dyslexic. And Geoff was in remedial reading in school.
And I failed English twice.
Very mysterious ways.
So the last thing, one time a teacher said, you write books? Oh.
It's hard to grasp.
Well, it's great to hear. What a great story of overcoming some of your challenges and then succeeding with God's help. So thank you so much for sharing that. I want to just say that George Mueller is in our History of Bible Literature B, and this was one of, I think it was the runner-up of all-time favorite Sonlight books. We did it all, like, what's your Sonlight book? All-time favorite Sonlight book, number 2. Wow. So I just wanted to make sure to say that. I forgot I have that one here on top to say that. So in that, how do you pick the missionaries you're writing about? How do you choose who you're going to write about?
It's kind of a collaboration between us and our publisher, you know, YWAM Publishing. Sometimes they'll suggest people. Other times we'll come across a story and like, wow, this is a great story. And so, I mean, there's some aspects that, firstly, the story has to be long enough and have enough really interesting things. That's why you don't find us writing a lot of books about people who just speak, because that's really difficult to do. People who go to places and do amazing things. So we're looking for those kind of traits in a story. And we find them, we talk together, and eventually we come up with, okay, we're going to do this person, and away we go.
And also we are always trying to balance things, and I know our publishers as well. We're trying to balance between men and women. We're trying to balance between countries that they go to. We're trying to span the spectrum of denominations. And, you know, faith-based and traditional denomination missionaries. And times that they were missionaries. So there's all of these things going into it. And yeah, we have to have enough material. Sometimes somebody has an amazing story, but it's like one story. And when you go to look for, where do I find the other stories about this person's life? They're not really there. This one story's been written for some missionary newsletter or something like that, and it's not possible to construct enough of the story, because one of the things we really want to do is have the reader feel like they know the person. So we can't leave out giant chunks of their life, like nothing is known about their childhood, because I mean that if you know somebody, you know something about their childhood. So it's there's a lot of factors go into it.
That's great. They are truly inspiring. Why do you think it's important for families to read missionary biographies?
I think because, for a couple of things, and especially when we started writing these, the internet didn't exist. So it was a chance to take, you know, having been missionaries for 10 years ourselves and in a lot of crazy places, to take people and show them there's a different world out there that you can, and to sort of take them into that world and see, look, this is what God can do in these places through people who go. So that was part of it. But I still think that's the same. It's like, okay, you can look now, you can go on and you can search and look at maps and of all these places, but it's really, again, transporting you to that place and transporting you onto the shoulder of the person that we're writing about, so that you can ride along through their lives and see that they struggle, that there's all of this stuff, but that hopefully at the end, what they did and who they are inspires our readers to perhaps go and be a missionary themselves, to pray more intelligently for missionaries, to give. There's, so many different ways. And we know that there are numbers of people who have read our books and are serving as missionaries today. So, but I think that's the real reason that
and I think the reading aloud, we were raised in the New Zealand education system, where in the public schools, the teachers read to children every day, right through till high school. And so for like 15 minutes. And so we both have very, very fond memories and very specific memories of being read to by our teachers and also our parents. Geoff's dad.
My dad in his monotone voice would read me these Christian stories and stuff at night before bed, and it just mesmerized me. And like I say, in his monotone, that was still really exciting.
But I think when someone, a parent or a teacher, takes the time to read aloud to you as a kid, it really sends a message that this is worth doing, rather than just saying, go read a book. Like, this is something, and it becomes a joint experience. Mm-hmm. I know when, our children were little and we read stories to them, then those stories became part of our family. And, we would talk about, oh, what would so-and-so do in this circumstances? Or this is just like when so-and-so did this. So you get that joint experience when you read with your children, and you get the, you get the weight, the children get the weight of, this is really worth mom, sitting on the edge of my bed for 15 minutes and, she's not on her phone while I'm, reading, trying to read myself to sleep or whatever. She's here with me. And I think that's something that it's an intangible, but it's something that sticks with a child for the rest of their life. Absolutely. We would agree. Good. Right. I didn't think that was controversial. Not at all. So what advice do you have parents who are using missionary biographies to read or teach their children? What advice do you have on navigating the books, or maybe making them the most interesting they can be? Any advice? Well, for me, I'm a past elementary school teacher, so I'm always interested in the educational value as well as the spiritual value of a book. And I think anything you can do to create connections for children in learning is where it's at. So I would say, if you're reading a book, find the places on the map, go online and go to YouTube and see if you can find a couple of good stories about, good little short documentaries about what you're learning about, and try to, if you've been reading other books, try to kind of cross-reference things so that children are getting you're casting a wider net. Yeah, and exactly, sort of look around. You can begin to, especially with technology, you can do Skype calls with some missionaries and find out their specific needs and pray for them and help raise money for them, and so to become, if you really like the person or the organization that they were serving with, you can become involved with that. And I know that we've had a lot of people from our Cameron Townsend book have gotten involved with Wycliffe Bible translators because they were really so impressed with him. And so, we hear that from Wycliffe too, like, these people come to us and want to get involved. There we go. Yes. And when we did one on our class teacher, John, who is a missionary doctor who started a hospital in Peru and is still there. And I went to visit him and see his hospital. And we were when we had conferences, we were at a conference in Orlando a couple of years ago, and a man came up to us. He was a doctor, and he lives about 5 miles from us. And he and his family had read the book aloud, and they were off to Peru in the next month.
To work at the hospital.
To work at the hospital just for like, a month or so, and just to, they had been inspired by the book. And, you don't know where these things are going to go. It's amazing sometimes the stories that we hear. Have I got time to tell you another quick one?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, we have, we wrote one on the Japanese one. It was on.
Which Japanese? The one on.
A missionary who went to Japan but didn't stay there.
Florence Young.
No, anyway, I'll tell the story. Anyway, one of our readers, I think he was from Oregon, read our Amy Carmichael. Read our book on Amy Carmichael, and she had initially gone to Japan. And it, as I understand the story, which was relayed to me, it awoke in him the thought that he had always wanted to go to Japan as a missionary, and he hadn't got there. And he liked the story so much and felt it was so inspiring that he contacted our publisher, and he actually himself, this reader, paid to have our book translated into Japanese and printed and distributed to university students across Japan.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, that's a crazy story, but I mean, and now what has happened to those books? Where are they now? Who are they impacting? Who are they drawing to the Lord? I mean, we have no idea. We have a woman who does all our distribution into South America, and she says she's in South America all the time, and she routinely finds people who are holding one of our books, and they'll write on the cover. Everybody that's read the book writes on the cover, and there'll be like 50 or 60 names inside one book.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it is kind of mind-blowing and very, very humbling to think that these are just like little seeds that are going out, in where they land and what they blossom into. We have no idea.
Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing.
Yes.
What is your favorite missionary that you've written about, your favorite missionary book?
Part of me says whoever we're writing about right now, but we have to suck it up and say something. Geoff, what do you say?
Well, there's a couple. I really still book John Williams, who is, I'm not sure whether you have that there. He was the missionary who really opened up the South Pacific. And of course, he's very well known in New Zealand and his story is really just quite amazing. And so that's always one of my favorites, because we've spent a lot of time living in various parts of the Pacific in that. But I think probably my favorite one now, and it was the hardest to write, is the book on Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Partly because it was so hard to write, but because the story itself is so inspiring. So that's probably mine.
Yeah, and we get very attached to these people because we're reading, we read every biography we can find on them. We read their letters, we read their newsletters if they've sent them, we read their diaries, and, we get quite, when we have to kill them off and have a funeral, we're normally crying at the same time.
Yeah. We read them back and like,
he had to die. Well, yes, he was born in 1720. He did have to die. But I think for me, probably the only book that I can't really talk about without tearing up is George Mueller. So I would have to say, I think your audience is quite correct. And I do love a lot of the stories, but there's just something about George Mueller that just chokes me up every time. So, and I've been thinking of researching it, though it would take a lot of research, but I think from all of the, we've done 80
Oh, we're just finishing the 80th book in the series.
So from all of that reading that I've done around those 80 people, I think that George Mueller is named as the person who influenced more missionaries than anybody else. He's certainly, there's many missionaries who write about who have been influenced by George Mueller and credit him with them going out. So yeah, I think he is the missionary's missionary. And I kind of find that interesting. People like Corrie ten Boom and lots of them. I mean, I'd have to go back through and read all the books again, but it does interest me that there's something about George that is quite universal.
Yeah, he's really popular. And what's really interesting for me, he was one of the co-founders of the denomination that I grew up in New Zealand. So we knew who he was, and I asked George Mueller kind of thing. It didn't really, everybody just knew who he was. It didn't really, it probably didn't even inspire us. It was just there. So
He's just this
when
old
we
guy.
came to do this, and his name, came up, and then, wouldn't everybody have written about him? Because we always knew about, but no, that book has just really impacted lives. It was one of those things that's just something, oh yeah, I know all about him, but most of the world didn't. So it's.
And you really didn't either.
Well, no. Well, I knew what he did and stuff, but yeah, the ins and outs, all the ins and outs of his story. Yeah.
Well, that is actually a really good lead-in to our last question I have, and that is, for kids who are aspiring to be a writer, what's your best advice, and maybe what's the process? Because it does sound like you fall in love with the characters that you're writing about, which is absolutely, when you're in the throes of reading about that person, it's easy and probably necessary to do.
Yes. Yeah. What would you say?
Well, I think that we touched on it. One of the first things, any writer, any good writer is a reader. And you read and you read, and you get inspired by stories. But you're also, as you read, you begin to find, I like the way this person tells the story, or that person. And advice is to sort of emulate that when you start to write. It's but also make the story like John Elizabeth Sherrill taught us how to write, but we took what they taught us and made it our own, created our own voice for telling stories. Now it's an outgrowth of how they began to do it. So find people that you really like and begin to play around with writing in some of the ways that they do to get stuff going, just get stuff down on the paper and read it. And then also, if you want to write, develop a habit of trying to write every day, something or other. And that's something that we really never did, but it's.
Well, we could have.
We could have, and I wished we had, but certainly, because once you start to write, it's a discipline that you have to do. And then you just look, getting it down, find a really good subject, especially if you're writing like we are, somebody who's interesting and that is inspiring, begin to tell their story and just play with it. And it doesn't have to be a book length. You can write, a few pages just to see, and then let other people read it. Writers, especially when you're starting out, you write this stuff and then you're like, oh, I don't want to share this with anybody. But no, you have to. That's the whole point of writing, is to share it and then listen to what people also tell you about what you've written for clues that can help you make it better and stronger, and listen to what they tell you is the really good stuff in it, and put more of that in on your next go round.
Yeah, and I would add to that, when you start reading a book, you're reading it normally to see what happens. So you're reading it, you're interested in the story, you want to know what happens to the person next, do they get through this trial, how do they get through this trial? So if you just keep reading different books, you're always going to be, the plot is going to be pulling you through the story. And it's very hard to analyze what you've read in any terms other than the plot. But if you would take a story that you love and would like to write, just take one chapter. And if you would read that 3 or 4 times, then you will start to see how that chapter works. Where did they start? How much speech is in it? What kind of level of words difficulty is in it? How do they get from one time to another? How do you know how the person's feeling? You can get all of that from just reading, but not necessarily reading on the first go round, because that you just want to keep going. So I would say, rather than read 5 books, if you want to write like somebody, read one chapter 5 times and really think about it, because after you've read it 2 or 3 times, you know what's going to happen. That part of your mind that is pulling you forward switches off, and you can switch over to, oh, look, let's circle all of the first 2 or 3 words in a sentence, at the beginning of a paragraph. How do they start a paragraph? How long are the paragraphs? How do they change from one place to another? And you'll begin to see patterns, and you begin to see, well, I could write a paragraph like that. But you won't see that on the first time around. So yeah, I think reading is really essential, but rereading is probably more essential.
Right. And that's probably the single biggest question we get asked. Like, people will email us or write to us sometimes. Tell me, how can I write like you? And we've actually put it on our list of things to do now, is actually to create a little course on just how to approach these kinds of stories, because there's so many more stories that we could ever write. And as we took up the mantle that John and Elizabeth had and began telling these kinds of stories, we want other people to do that for us. So at some stage in the not too distant future, we'll put together a little course that can hopefully inspire people and give them some hands-on help to do that.
Well, I love that plan. I think that's great. You can meet Janet and Geoff's Christian heroes now and then in many of our Sonlight levels, and I hope that you do enjoy exploring. They have a ton more out there on YWAM Publishing. There's, like they said, there are 80 books, or so.
Yes.
79. It sounds like you're working on the 80th.
Yes.
Yes. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me today, and I appreciate all your advice and your story. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Bye.